Hey, this is Mike Lindsay from Vital MX, and we're going to give you our first look at the 2022 KTM 250 SXF Factory Edition. A lot of people call this 22.5, and it's basically a prelude to what will be the 2023 KTM 250 SXF. We are really used to seeing the 450 factory editions. KTM very rarely has done the 250, but in this case, they got an all-new bike. They want Max Vohland to race it. They're bringing in the minimum 400 units to do so, and it's the largest overhaul the 250 has seen in quite a while, especially engine-wise. I'd heard rumors for years that KTM has been working on this new Screamer 250, even shorter stroke, larger bore. I know at one point they wanted this engine almost 3 years ago, weren't happy with it, scrapped it and went back to the drawing board and put in the work to bring out the bike that we are seeing here in this video. If you've watched the 450 video, I apologize. You're probably going to hear some of the similars at the beginning. Considering I've done this once, we'll try to get through a little quicker. But we're going to start at the plastic, the ergos, etc. with this bike. It's an all-new look, of course. Talking to product managers, engineers, and everybody, they're really focused on contact points of this bike. Other than just wanting to give the bike a fresh look, they thought up a few things to make the rider's connection to the bike a little bit better. We've got wider foot pegs. They're tapered a little bit. It gives you basically your feet out at a farther position to pinch your knees in more, better leverage. Seat profile is different for those reasons. The way it's curved over the top, where it's thin, where it's thick, give better contact. It has symmetrical side plates because usually your right side plate over the exhaust is a little bit wider. They've actually tapered the left one to match. So when you slide back on the bike, you have the same kind of area to lock your legs in on both sides, and it feels the same just to kind of maintain control. The airbox panels, I feel like on the last bike there was kind of a gap where you'd want to connect with your legs. They've sort of added some plastic back to try to give you more area to grip on the motorcycle. Radiator shrouds are long and tapered in to try to keep away from the boot hooking. And then there's this textured material on the top of the radiator shroud that you'll see, which is actually, it tapers over the top of the radiator, and it's kind of for guys, deep ruts that are able to get their legs up high. It kind of allows you to almost press your leg into that part of the shroud, and it's textured to hold your leg and hold your grip there. So getting a super deep rut, the bike's way lower, you get on the power hard, it's almost like your legs gripped up there and helps keep you a little bit forward on the motorcycle. There's these little winglets on the back of the front fender to kind of reduce some of the rocks and dirt and roost coming off your own front tire that would kick up in your helmet and goggles. Nifty little thing. We'll see if it ends up being gimmicky if they stay with it, but cool thought on their part. And yeah, just that kind of clears up some of the things here with the ergos. Moving on to, we'll go to the engine, because like I said, that's a big change around 250. We do have new cases, new bottom end that's kind of modified to change the mounting points in the frame, because KTM is going to a new situation. So the prior 250 and its brethren, the 350, use the same cases, meaning they could use the same frame with the same cradle for both those bikes. The 450 has had to have a different frame for a while because the motor fit different in the cradle. The new 450 cases have been heavily modified, and the 250 have been modified to kind of match to the point that they all mount up the same. So basically, KTM can take the same frame that they've put all this development work into, and it works for 250, 350, and 450 as it comes off the product line. Theoretically, if you have the electronics and all the parts, you could swap all three motors through one bike that you bought, and they would work. Even more rumored, I've heard the two-stroke cases will change to a similar degree to the point they mount up in the cradle. So I believe we'll see kind of a universal frame with KTM and, of course, their Husky and Gas product down the line. So just once again kind of allows them to unify everything. Also with the engine, KTM for a long time had the largest bore shortest stroke in the class at 78 millimeter bore, 52.3 millimeter stroke, up until the Honda 250 and 18, which jumped them to a 79 millimeter bore, where I believe like the Cowie, or the old Cowie, Yamaha and Suzuki had always been like a 77, kind of when four strokes 250S first came in. The Cowie had jumped up to 78, I believe, with the Cowie. Like I said, the Cowie had jumped up to 78 with the KTM Husky gas product, and then the Honda was up at a 79 mil bore. This bike, they've shortened the stroke to 48.5 millimeters, and they've jumped the bore up to 81 millimeters. They are 3 millimeters bigger than they used to be. They have bumped the compression ratio to their claimed number of 14.5 to 1, which most people would have considered a race piston, 4 or 5 years ago for ratio. And then on top of that, they've also gone through and changed their cylinder head intake port. Anybody, whether a lot of your aftermarket or your engine builders that are doing KTMs for pros and Supercross and outdoors have been taking the current KTM head and epoxying the intake port on the floor, giving it a D shape, kind of decreasing the inlet size, changing how the air flows into the motor for quite a few years now to get better performance out of it, more low to mid. KTM, based on the way they kind of talked about it, they've decreased the size of the intake or the inlet port on this bike. So I think they've done a few things to sort of mimic what all these engine builders have been doing, and I believe even what they were doing in factory services to their own engines probably. So taking, again, that race information and bringing it into a production level. The board change is quite big, and it'll be interesting to ride this bike for engine character. They said their main reason for is they know their bikes typically been a lot of mid-top. They were looking still for more mid-range to kind of get it up through that mid-character quicker, and that's why I said they've seen the most increase with this engine change. The cylinder head itself has changed quite a bit. It is still a dual cam, but it has an overall cam tower cap, kind of like the 450. You don't have the little eyelets you see anymore in the head. They've really reduced the material out of the head casting itself. They brought down the head, similar to how they've been doing the 450 a couple years, because they've tried to shrink the overall mass and area that the engine takes up and then tilt it back in the frame a little bit, again, mass centralization, change the handling character, how the engine inertia affects the motor cycle in general. They've also got a new clutch basket design, same as the 450, new transmission ratios, quite a, like I said, decent amount of engine overall here. To be exact, it is 2 degrees tilted back, is 8 millimeters shorter in height, and the countershaft sprocket is 3 millimeters lower. The 450 and 250 now match that position, which changes the bike's anti-squat character, how it drives, how the shock position is while it's driving, like how much it fights squatting, basically. Anybody from mountain bike world probably is a little bit more well-versed in anti-squat character and what it means. The bike also does share with the new 450, electronics. It's got a new little cluster. You've got your traction control, your launch control, and now we have a quick shifter. Very unique because this is an item I've heard people suggest multiple times they think race teams run, but based on the information I've talked to teams, it seems to not be common, because if it's an external unit on the shifter, there's been a lot of concern with, hey, and their bikes were bouncing around, rattling around, stuff is impacting. What if it accidentally engaged and cut at the wrong time? Because a quick shifter, for anybody that's well-versed in road bikes would know, is basically go down the straightaway, hold the throttle wide open, and you can just shift. You don't have chop throttle, you don't have to touch the clutch. As soon as you pull up on the shifter, once the strain gauge feels the movement, whatever the conditions are met within that to activate the system, it will cut the ignition to the bike for a split second to reduce the load on the motor so the shift can be completed. This apparently has been built more internally into this KTM in a way that they're confident that it can be used in everyday application without problems. You can also, it's on the cluster, same as traction control. If you don't want it on, you just press the button. If the light's off, the quick shifter is not engaged. You press the button, the little blue purplish light comes on. Quick shifter is activated, and it works from second to fifth gear. It does not work from first to second, only second. From second to third, third to fourth, fourth to fifth, it will work. Big change for KTM is on the frame. So, of course, KTM out of the major OEMs is the only one with still a center backbone frame. It is not a perimeter frame where you have 2 spars coming off the head tube all the way down to the foot peg region. You have a center backbone that goes under the fuel tank, and right before it goes down to the foot peg region, splits into 2 smaller spars. For years, KTM has had that backbone that runs from the steering head all the way down under the rider and goes into just a straight shock tower mount. So any force applied from the shock, which is a lot when the bike's slamming into things, all that energy coming up to the shock is sent through the single tube all the way to the steering head. So vice versa, energy coming off the front end from impacts was sent down from the steering tube down into the backbone of the frame into the shock tower. Those ends were affecting each other from a flex characteristic and a load standpoint. Each end of the bike wanted to basically affect the other. They've wanted to separate that, and they've kind of gone to a design that we've seen more common with twin spar frames, which is a bridged shock tower. Basically, now the KTM comes down the backbone, it splits to the spars that go down to the foot pegs. And after the spars split, there's a bridge that connects over to each other, hydroform that wraps over the top of the frame that has the shock tower mount built into it. So now when the shock is experiencing force and forcing into the frame, it's just kind of pulling up on this shock tower, and that shock tower is mounted to those side spars going down the foot pegs. It's just kind of, the energy is more pulling up on that instead of being forced up a spine all the way into the front of the frame. So they said that's really been their only goal on the flex characteristic of the frame, is try not to affect the rest of the handling characteristic, and where the rest of the frame twist or stiff and soft, etc. They just wanted to try to eliminate the rear and front of their bike affecting each other energy-wise while maintaining the current handling characteristic that they had. With the new shock tower, them repositioning the engine, new airbox, they need to change their shock layout. Better, for the fitment, they've shrunk that shock by 15 millimeters. That's the eyelet to eyelet position. They have not changed the stroke, which is still 300 millimeters. With that, they've also changed their linkage a little bit and their swing arm and packaged it differently. The swing arm is now more rigid to get it a little bit more precise in certain areas, but so it's not so rigid that it takes away from comfort. They have matched it up with a different axle size. Prior was a 25 millimeter rear axle. They've now dropped it to a 22 for a little bit give right at the end of the swing arm, and they feel like that character has matched up well with their new swing arm to get, the handling gains they wanted while still maintaining comfort and feel to the rider itself. The shock itself has seen a few updates. The biggest one they're talking about is their shock piston design has changed. It now has asymmetrical hole design. Basically, it's got one big hole, one small hole, one big hole. Doesn't have matching hole sizes all the way around the piston. So there's a different amount of oil flow coming through the piston, contacting the first shim, and it lifts the shim in more of a wave pattern, which they said the force, the way it's applied and lifts the shim, it's a little bit more comfort or a little bit better action that they were looking for. The fork itself has an update setting, but hasn't really changed componentry wise. It's still the exact 48 millimeter AER air technology fork that we've had for the past few years. A little bit of change for them on suspension is now everything is toolless. They've had the little adjuster on the compression side of the fork, the clicker that you could turn with your fingers. Now on the shock, both high and low speed, they've converted to a little plastic clicker that you can actually just with your fingers turn instead of needing a screwdriver. And then the rebound on the shock has this little ridge sticking off of it that you can grab with your fingers and turn. So all your suspension adjustments are basically toolless now. You don't have to have screwdrivers or T-handles on you to make suspension adjustments. The subframe design is new on the bike. KTM and GasGas have been on aluminum subframes. You have these carbon composites on the Huskies, both for very different reasons. And they decided to try to get the best of both worlds. You basically have an aluminum subframe that is a two-piece with a molded, I guess you could call, for a lack of a better term, people still might call it a carbon composite, but the actual term they're using is a polyamide composite subframe. So the reason for this is the aluminum is strong where it mounts to the frame. Those contact points are nice and strong, but where the aluminum doesn't have as much flex or memory farther back in the subframe where there's leverage against an impacts, they've done the two-piece. They've gone to the second piece is the polyamide composite in the back half of the subframe, which their claim, I think, was 6 to 7 inches of flexion it can experience and still have enough memory to snap back to its original point. So this just gets them better durability. It allows them to change their airbox design and inlets there, and also create a stout enough point that your inlets can act as kind of a grab handle when you're picking up the bike on and off the stand. The bike is a factory edition, so once again, limited 400 units, couple of special goodies, orange frame, Red Bull graphics, split triple clamps that you normally only see in the Power Parts catalog with a 20 to 22 millimeter offset clamp. Basically, the steering stem is offset at the base. You can pop it out and spin it. One weighs 20 millimeters for the offset. The other flips it to 22 millimeters. Launch control, Power Parts wheel set, a couple little goodies like that. Being it's an all-new bike, pretty typical when the factory edition is an all-new motorcycle. It doesn't come with an exhaust system. It just comes with the production one this year. Once the bike has existed, the follow-up factory editions are more about getting the special goodies, so there's usually more of them on the bike. But when it's an all-new generation bike, typically for KTM, the idea of the factory edition is more you're getting the next generation bike earlier for the racers, the guys that have to have that extra 0.5, 0.1, however you quantify percentage of an advantage. It's not the bike for everybody. I know some people still always squawk at these things like, oh, these are pointless. Why do they exist? They don't exist for everybody. They exist for a certain level of consumer that really enjoy the style of motorcycle, and I give props to KTM for continuing to do bikes like this and really try to fill the need and niches of all the consumers they may have out there. If you enjoyed this deep dive on the tech side of this bike, please give us a like, subscribe, throw it down in the comments section if you got any questions about this bike. I'll try to answer it. We will be testing this motorcycle probably the end of January, early February when they become available. That's about the same time they will be hitting dealerships. Yeah, thanks for watching, and like I said, keep tuned for more.